We got some favorable news. Last week was not so favorable. You saw the administration pass executive orders cutting CDFI funds, which are largely based on grants made through that to fund community development finance institutions, which are a large cohort of financial liquidity to the affordable housing space, and that in the form of loans, grants, other equity-like subsidies. But they passed a continuing resolution, which is again fully funding HUD, which is the largest provider of affordable housing through housing choice vouchers, Section 8 based project-based Section 8 contracts, supporting rents and affordable rents.
Have you already been affected by changes out of Washington in this administration?
Absolutely. I mean, we've had transactions that had to get repriced and stalled because either our financing opportunities, our lenders were either CDFI lenders, and programs are dramatically changing. If you were going in with a CDFI on pricing at an 8% fixed rate loan, and now you have to be going midway through a transaction at hard money to close a transaction because you have deposits down that are hard, you could be facing a 400 basis point increase in your cost of capital. These are real-time changes that are affecting the economics of.
So is that making you pivot in terms of different parts of your business, maybe spending more time elsewhere?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the things, we were born out of largely a market rate development shop that focused mostly on workforce housing and attainable housing. So that's really just housing at large, but more so C and B class housing, existing housing stock, which, at the end of the day, most of these policies, whether it's tariffs, immigration, other things, are going to affect the supply-demand imbalances, which are already extreme due to low housing starts, especially coming out of the GFC. COVID, interest rates were so low, you finally got a little bit of a pop in development pipeline, but that's largely stalled due to the whipsaw and interest rates coming back up. So we look at that being a sustained problem, just given that tariffs are going to increase lumber prices, other inputs for construction, so construction costs going up. Immigration is going to affect labor supply and labor wage rates. These are already under extreme price pressures affecting the industry. And so we see a very big problem with deliveries, but that's actually good for existing housing, right? Because the demand is largely unchanged. And so, we probably are going to see inflationary pressure on rents as well, exacerbating the affordable housing problem. So it's quite complicated, and what's going on right now across the sector.
Katie Hubbard from Walton Global was just sitting in your seat about an hour ago, and she is in the city for meetings with her customers, who are the large developers of the land that her company sells to them. So the big home builders. She said they're not yet seeing increased costs due to materials. She says they're not seeing issues when it comes to labor. Why are they telling her that they're not seeing that, but you're seeing that?
So you have to think about it, I guess, from a larger industry perspective. Her end buyers, largely publicly traded companies, Pulte, the likes, right? They are not only mandated by their boards to use legal labor versus the private sector, which is able to tap into
Good point.
Non-legal immigrants for labor. There's a big divergence between those, and they're such at large scale. They largely wholesale, bulk purchase, and warehouse their materials, whether it's overseas. Otherwise, they can navigate a large shift where you have tariffs on Canadian lumber versus bringing in cabinets from China at bulk, and they basically forward lock their pipelines, and they're able to price that out. They're not feeling it yet, but if this is a sustained, protracted tariff war that is more global in scope, it can make it very, very challenging.
But same thing with labor. I'm assuming those, who are, I guess, U.S. citizens or what, or they're going to have a certain labor pool, and I'm assuming those workers too are going to want their contracts with the big publicly held.
Yeah, absolutely, because there's certainty, but I think there's another element to it. Rental developers versus for sale developers. A lot of the Pulte Homes, Toll Brothers, the larger publics, they're home builders, they're for sale product. So they're not necessarily, worried so much about the input. They can largely, it's such a supply constrained market from a for sale, there's no inventory. So new deliveries are largely going to be able to bear the price inflation that's going to come out of increased cost of construction on a for sale product. But at the end of the day, financing, everything else as far as, multifamily rental product is largely driven by the confluence of interest rates and what you can charge on a nominal price per rent, plus inflating expenses across insurance and other things. So it's largely a cash flow problem. Inflation is going to really impact housing development because you're solving to a cash flow that at some point you can't inflate out of. So those starts get halted.